Attention! This makes absolutely no sense. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Zander's Facts.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into the latest edition of the Zander's Facts podcast. I am, of course, the aforementioned Zander. It is Wednesday, May 3rd. We are in the 5th month of 2023. It is episode 103 of the podcast. How about that, y'all? Thank you all so much for listening. We've got a ton of facts to get to on this podcast because he is back. Our Zander's Facts senior NBA analyst, Billy, is back on the podcast this week. He was on a few weeks ago. He decided to make a very poor decision in his championship pick.
Terrible.
So he has come back to redeem himself on the podcast, but also to recap everything we saw in the first round of the NBA playoffs. If you haven't been watching the NBA playoffs, you need to. There's drama, there's great basketball, everything you could want. It is all good stuff. You should be watching. We're going to recap that, and we're going to talk about the Conference Semifinals, the next round, which is just starting in these last few days. So we're going to talk about that with Hillbilly in just a second here on the podcast. But before we do, I just wanted to remind you all that if you like the Zander's Facts podcast, if you think you're going to like all the facts on this week's edition, remember to follow this podcast, download this episode 103, rate and review the podcast, then check us out on all the social medias, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, at Zander's Facts. That is Zander with a Z. And most importantly, remember to tell all your friends, we like to call it around here, spread the facts. Zander's Facts Podcast. Tell all your friends about the podcast, about the newsletter, Zander's Weekend Facts, which is a recap of the week's top headlines every Sunday morning. I write it out. It's awesome. It's free. You can sign up. It's a Substack in this episode's description. Also, check out the Zander's Facts link tree because that has all the Zander's Facts links that you need for the podcast, for the socials, for the newsletter, all the Zander's Facts links that you need. Maybe too many facts. There's never too many facts. All the facts you need, the right amount of facts, are on the Zander's Facts link tree, which is also linked in this episode's description. So we're going to get to Hillbilly in just a second, but it is episode 103 of the podcast. I just thought I would note that I was planning to have more facts than just NBA facts on the podcast this week. I was planning a big topic. The issue is, of course, it's the beginning of May. It's a busy time. It's my last week of classes. I've got so much stuff going on. So, for this week, we're just going to kind of roll through, talk about some basketball. We all love talking about basketball. But there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about, and because we're at the beginning of the month, I thought that I would just kind of lay out what we're going to talk about this month on the podcast, because we're going to have a ton of episodes that have a ton of facts. I wanted to talk about, and this just news came out on Monday about this, so I thought this was perfect timing. Hopefully next week, we're going to talk about the debt ceiling. We've talked about the debt ceiling a little bit on this podcast before, but now we're like in the crunch time because it was reported on Monday that June 1st could be the day where we can't pay our bills and we default on our debt, the United States of America, which would be really bad.
Uh-oh.
So I wanted to talk about that, give all the facts about that on the podcast. We're going to do that hopefully next week, but at least in a future episode this week on this podcast. Also, if you read Zander's Weekend Facts on Sunday, and if you read Zander's Weekend Facts, you know I have a little section for an article, a kind of story that I read from the past week, what Zander's been reading. And the article that I linked last week was an article from Vice News of this group of conservative moms that is kind of weaponizing education and not doing so in very nice ways. Like when I read the article, I was absolutely shocked at the stuff that's in there. So if you haven't read the article, I would encourage you to do so. It's linked on the Zander's Weekend Facts from last week or from this past Sunday, where we also talked about the Phoenix Suns and their new TV deal, how that's going to change, how local TV, sports rights work, all that stuff. So you should go read that. But also,
Shameless bug.
I really wanted to talk about education. Last year, I did a whole episode about schooling, public schooling, charter schools, and education on this podcast. But right now, the big thing, what's in right now is book banning and Moms for Liberty. That's the group I want to talk about. So all the stuff that's going on with education, I also wanted to talk about on this podcast. And then, of course, by the end of the month, by the end of May and getting into June, the NBA Finals are going to start, so Hillbilly's going to have to come back on the podcast. And also soccer, because you all know I love soccer, and I have a lot of, oh boy, I've talked a little bit about soccer, but I have a lot of things to say about some of these clubs. So the club soccer season's coming to an end in Europe at the end of the month. Obviously, we're going to talk about that. The Women's World Cup is coming up this summer. USA three-peat incoming!
America.
We're going to talk about that. There's so many things we're going to talk about over the next month and this summer on the podcast. I'm really excited to talk about that, all those things, and give all the facts, of course. So I just wanted to preview what's going to be coming up in the next few episodes, next few weeks and months of this podcast, because, oh boy, y'all, get ready. We are going to be spreading a lot of facts. It is going to be a fact-filled summer on the Zander's Facts podcast. There's a lot of facts on this episode, though. It's episode 103, as I said. Our Zander's Facts senior NBA analyst, Hillbilly, is back on the podcast to redeem himself from his horrific prediction that he made a couple weeks ago. You can still listen to it. It's still live, episode 101 of the podcast. You should go listen to that. And so we recap the first round of the NBA playoffs, and we talk about the conference semifinals. There's a lot of great stuff that we talked about, a lot of facts. I would encourage you to stay tuned, because we're going to get to that right now. Our NBA playoffs update with our Zander's Facts NBA analyst Hillbilly starts next as the Zander's Facts podcast continues.
Zander's Facts.
All right, welcome back. Episode 103 of the podcast. For the second time in 3 weeks, we are joined here on the Zander's Facts podcast by our very own Zander's Facts senior NBA analyst, Hillbilly. Hillbilly came on the podcast a couple weeks ago, and we previewed the NBA playoffs, and in that podcast, well, Hillbilly has some regret now. He would like to apologize to the audience for some very Ori take that he made. That was, come on, Hillbilly. I mean, really, the Bucks.
Whoops.
Yeah. In hindsight, it was obvious. I mean, it's just,
Of course.
I don't know how blind I could be. I mean, obviously you didn't pick the Bucks, you know, you knew that they were going to lose in Miami, I'm sure.
Well, no.
And, you know, in hindsight, it was obvious that Giannis would fall, like 8 feet right onto his back and break his back and be out for 2 games, and that the rest of them would just go ahead and suck because of that.
Yeah, well, okay. I didn't pick Miami, but I wish I did, because oh boy, I'm on the Heat train now. But let's just...
Well, that's the real question, though, Zander. Are you a Heat fan now?
Yes. Well, did you listen to the podcast? I was fully on board. I mean,
Okay, I missed that. All right, but
Last
it's
week.
Okay. Just want to make sure that's
Fully
what
on board.
that's all it took. Was just them beating the Bucks.
Well, I
to get you
said,
back
what did
there.
I say? A couple weeks ago, we were on the podcast. I said, what did I say? I follow them. I wasn't a fan. And you were like, oh, that's so sad. And I was like, well, if they win the series, I mean, and you know what? They won the series. So,
and they're in good shape right now. So
they are. We're gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about all the series that have been going on in the NBA playoffs. Because I don't know about y'all, but I have been fascinated. I have been captivated by these NBA playoffs the last few weeks. The first round I thought was awesome. Conference semifinals are shaping up pretty good. So we brought Hillbilly back on to recap everything that just happened in the first round. First round just wrapped up on Sunday, and the second round of the playoffs, the conference semifinals, is just getting going. Games are starting, series are starting. It is going to be super fun. We're going to have a lot of facts to bring you all. It's the only fact-filled NBA podcast, episode 103, with our Zander's Facts NBA analyst, Hillbilly. So as I said, let's just start. Before we get to the matchups that are now going on, the conference semifinals, let's just recap the best of the first round, which we should start, Hillbilly, with your beloved Milwaukee Bucks and my beloved now, Miami Heat.
Your re-beloved.
That's right. I don't think anybody... Listen, I did not see this coming. You listened to me on the podcast a couple weeks ago. I was trashing the Miami Heat, and a lot of people were, because Their offense was one of the worst in the league in the regular season. They lost to the Hawks at home in the play-in. They had to come back to beat the Bulls in the second play-in just to get to be the 8th seed. And then they dominate the Milwaukee Bucks in a 5-game series, 4-1. So, Hillbilly, obviously Giannis got injured and he missed those 2 games, but he played for a couple games in this series. And in every game he played in, they lost. So, what happened?
Good question.
Well, okay, to be fair, he only played it. What did he get injured in the first or second quarter? In the very first game? So, and then he's out for 2 games and he comes back. He was injured still. I think there was a lot of talk about the locker room being pretty grisly for him after the games because he was in so much pain. But I mean, regardless, like the Bucks, remember there was the one game where the Bucks killed it without
Game
Giannis.
2.
And they should be able to do that to them. But, it wasn't just Giannis being out and injured that was their problem. I think a lot of things really just got showed up. I mean, remember, Miami's also without Tyler Hero, which, I mean, Tyler Hero is no Giannis Antetokounmpo, but he's important for Miami. Like, they need that offense badly. Like, that's a really troubling player for them to lose. And, they didn't let that bother them collectively. The Bucks just didn't seem as though they were interested in playing at all. Like, Brook Lopez had a horrible series. Middleton shot the ball well, but he looked creaky out there. Holiday just got crucified by Jimmy Butler in that last game. And Budenholzer made some of the most stupid mistakes that I've seen a coach make in a long time.
Rude.
And I think, they've got a lot of decisions to make in the offseason here. I think there's a lot of talk of Budenholzer leaving, but I don't think it's just Budenholzer. I think they need to look up at the general manager as well. They have not been putting decent teams together, and they have put themselves into a position where they're going to have to make some really hard decisions. I mean, do you extend Chris Middleton for 4 years at a max contract with his injury history right now? That doesn't sound like a good idea, but that's probably what it would take to keep or something close to it. Giannis comes up for his extension next year. Whether he will take it or not, we'll see. And they just haven't made a lot of good decisions. They haven't gotten a good draft pick in a long time. And, I know they always pick late in the draft because they have Giannis, so they're always a good team. But, at least 1 out of 4 of those 20-something, picks, or those, between the 20th and 30th pick, whatever, 1 out of 4 of those, you've got to expect pans out. None of them have recently. We're looking at Malcolm Brogdon playing on the Celtics right now as 6th man of the year possible. The Bucks just let him go for cash. They just didn't want to pay him. All they had to do was extend him a contract offer. They make mistakes like that. The people that they brought in, I know they didn't spend high draft picks on Jay Crowder, but they did spend draft picks on him, and he doesn't even play. It's just difficult to see a lot of the decisions they made. They just got older and slower. And, I think that the general manager should take a lot of heat for that as well.
Yeah, it was really the perfect storm, I think, of Milwaukee losing their star player, him being injured, and their team not rallying around that, and Jimmy Butler just going absolutely nuts. 50
on one of the best defenders in the league.
Yeah.
When they did a poll of all the NBA players as to who the best defensive player in the league was, overwhelmingly, they said Drew Holiday. Jimmy Butler did that to him. That's pretty awesome.
He scored 56 points in Game 4, which was the most ever by a Heat player in the playoffs. Think of the players that have played for Miami in the playoffs, and Jimmy Butler has the most points. That's also a career high.
It's a fact.
They overcame a 15-point deficit in that game too, Hillbilly. It wasn't like the Bucks weren't doing well in these games. In Game 5, too. Game 5 was just... So, Game 4, after Game 4, Miami comes back and wins. They're up 3-1. And I think everybody was thinking, because even the line, Vegas had it at like 11 and a half or so, the Bucks were favored in Game 5. And they led by 16 points at the start of the fourth quarter, and Jimmy Butler scores 42 points just after his 56-point game. And so they win in overtime. Like, that's the Game 5 coming after that 56 points might even be more incredible. Just as to how he did it in Milwaukee to close out the series.
Well, and just in the fashion that he does it. Tyler Hero is, as we just talked about, out. Kyle Lowry's actually having a really good playoffs, but I mean, he's still not anything you have to be crazy worried about. You know it's going to be Jimmy Butler. Like, the Bucks knew that. It's obvious on every play almost, and they still can't stop.
No, I mean, it's just insane. Jimmy, I mean, that was one of the best playoff performance rounds I think we've seen in a while, Jimmy Butler.
Honestly, I wish it wasn't against the Bucks, because then I would have been able to enjoy it, because it was an incredible performance.
So sad.
Yeah. So Miami was the 6th. This has happened before a 1 seed has lost to an 8 seed. It's not as rare as like a 16 beating a 1 in March Madness. This is the 6th time that an 8 seed's beaten a 1 seed. But this is the first time that the 8 seeds won in 5 games. All the other times were in 6 games, 4-2. This was the first time that an 8 seed won the series 4 games to 1. One of those other 4-2 8 seed beating a 1 seed was this team, the Miami Heat. Not these players, but the team, back in 1999 with the Knicks. And we're going to be talking about that series because those two teams are playing in the semifinals of the conference. So we're going to preview that in a little bit. So yeah, Hillbilly's feeling very distraught. But let's move on. I think this will be more exciting. Because I think this was the most exciting series of the first round, was Kings Warriors. I don't think anybody would doubt that. It was the only one to go to 7 games. And the Kings, they won the first 2 games of the series. They looked really good. They got to light the beam. Warriors came back at home in San Francisco, won the next 2. Then Hillbilly, Golden State steals the game in Sacramento Game 5, so they don't get to light the beam. Perfect opportunity to close it out in 6. You don't have to go back to Sacramento and play in front of those fans for Game 7, and I don't know what happened, but they didn't close it out, so they go to Game 7, and then Hillbilly Steph Curry puts on one of the great performances a great player has in a Game 7.
Yeah, he sure did. I mean, we're talking about 2 back-to-back performances there, with Steph and Jimmy Butler, where it's just, we've already seen 2 all-time performances. And yeah, Steph's was just, it's really one of the most exciting players that you can watch. I mean, you think about how good he is, and like how he is climbing up the pantheon of the great players of all time. And he's got to be in the top 10 now. He's the only person that's even in consideration when you think about like the great players of all time that's under 6'6". And he's like, what, 6'1", 6'2"? I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, everybody else, like Jordan's about as small as it gets, in that group. He's so small, but he's just so incredibly skilled at what he does. So much fun to watch. And it's rare that I root for a team that's this dominant, because I usually root for the underdog, but I just can't help it with and I can't stand Draymond, but I can't help it.
No, and against the ultimate underdog, really, in the Sacramento Kings, even though they were the higher seed.
And they acquitted themselves very well. That was like you said, that was a really great series to watch. Sacramento came out swinging. I don't think Sabonis really had the best series, but I think De'Aaron Fox really, I mean, he got hurt at the end, and when your shooting hand is restricted the way that his is, I mean, that's really tough. But I think De'Aaron Fox really showed everybody what he is, that he is a legit superstar.
Clutch player of the year.
Yeah, just really something else. So, future's bright. Got to think Sacramento's got to be pretty excited.
Yeah. So De'Aaron Fox, the first 6 games of the series, he had 20 points or more, which I believe was tied with Oscar Robertson, I think, for the most 20-plus point games to start the playoffs in your career, because those were his first 6 games.
Nice fact.
Clutch player of the year. But also, I mean, let's just go back to Steph for a second because he had 50 points in Game 7 in Sacramento, which is the most in NBA history in a Game 7.
Fact!
Which is insane. He also scored in the whole series, it wasn't just Game 7, 236 points in the series. And I think we forget how old he is because he's 35. He's the first player who's age 35 or more to score over 200 points in a playoff series since The Last Dance. Michael Jordan did it back in the 98 Conference Finals and in the NBA Finals. So really, historic, not just game, but series for Steph Curry. And they really needed it, Hillbilly, because there were times in that Game 7, I think, where Sacramento, obviously, they had a chance. The Warriors ended up winning by 20, but that wasn't really until the end when they pulled away. But Sacramento
it was a
absolutely had
very
a chance.
competitive game. Yeah, no, and Sacramento had several chances during the game to really, like, there were a couple points where I kind of saw it coming, where it's like it felt like the Kings are about to pull out. Like they're about to not make it uncompetitive necessarily, but really kind of put it right to almost out of reach. And Steph Curry just wasn't going to let it happen. I mean, he didn't get a ton of help from his other splash brother there.
No.
And he just hasn't had a good playoff so far, but Curry's playing about as well as anybody ever has. I think it's probably as well as he's played in his career.
Whoa.
I mean, I think the numbers back it up too.
Wow. Yeah. So on the other side of the coin, you've got the Kings. And as we said, that was a competitive Game 7. It was a competitive series. Their fans were going crazy. Obviously, it was the first time they've been in the playoffs. Mike Brown, Coach of the Year, absolutely deserved. But what do you think, Hillbilly, is that for next year, what do they need to take the next step? Because they were the third seed, obviously, this year in the playoffs. But to get into that upper echelon of teams in the West, like the Warriors, the Lakers when LeBron and AD are healthy, the Nuggets right now, what do you think they need to get up to that top tier, take the next step?
Well, I think it's a tricky answer. I mean, I think for one thing, they just need for next year to happen because Keegan Murray is going to be better. DeAndre Fox is going to be better. Malik Monk will probably be better. And he's really come on for them. Like all those guys are on the upswing. Keegan Murray's a rookie. Really, the only player who gets big minutes for them that isn't kind of on the upswing of their career is Harrison Barnes, who, that might be an idea to look for him. I thought that it's as incredible as Steph Curry's game was, and it was, he had a truly incredible game and he deserves all the credit for it. Kevon Looney's job down low with more than 20 rebounds in that game, and he's just shoving Sabonis aside, was also the real mark of the game there. I mean, Curry didn't have an incredibly efficient night. He shot fine. He had good numbers, but it wasn't like he was just hitting everything. But they were getting offensive rebound after offensive rebound. So maybe bringing in somebody that can, I don't know, at least come in for some minutes to help with rebounding and help with toughness down there, because that would have made all the difference, I think.
I think we'd both definitely say most exciting series of the first round, and a lot of people liked it because Game 4 of that series was last Sunday afternoon. It was on ABC. It was the most watched first round playoff game in 21 years since the Lakers and the Trailblazers in 2002, which was back on NBC. That's how far back it was. Mm-hmm. And then Game 7 was a Sunday afternoon, so who knows how many viewers that got. But yeah, definitely a great series. And the Warriors advance to the conference semifinals. So they will face, Hillbilly, the Los Angeles Lakers, who took down the Memphis Grizzlies. I know to your displeasure, but they kind of I don't think that series was really close. Just watching it. I mean,
no, it's really kind of testament to how fickle the NBA can be. I mean, Memphis, if I was a Memphis fan, just a few months ago, I'm as excited as any fan in the league. I've got this incredibly young team that's just shredding people. It's deep. We still have all of our draft picks and everything looks great. And then just stuff starts to trickle in with Morant. We get the injuries. And now at the point where they just collapsed against the Lakers. I mean, did you, going into that final game in the Lakers-Memphis series there, did you think that Memphis had any chance of winning?
No, because the Lakers were already up 3-1. They basically gave the game to Memphis in Memphis, and then you go game 6 back in Los Angeles. They're not going to lose that game. There's no way.
It was just they weren't competitive, and they've got big problems, and that are going to always be systemic problems for them. I mean, a lot of their offense is predicated on the transition game, which so is Miami's. So I don't know how much that actually proves. Although Miami, I think, has the best coach in the NBA, so that helps. But you need that half court offense reliably in the playoffs in the NBA, and they just showed that they really don't have it. And Ja Morant just looks like he has a lot of growing up to do. I mean, he just kind of wilted, and Jaren Jackson kind of the same.
Well, he wasn't the biggest off the court personality issue for Memphis, but
yeah. So it's kind of stinks. I mean, my enthusiasm for the team would be a little tempered right now if I was a Grizzlies fan, just because Morant's got to get his act together and lead that team, because they look like they were without a rudder.
Yeah, and then you've also got Dylan Brooks out there saying he doesn't respect anybody unless they drop 40 on him.
And taking every three he wants to. Just taking every single 3-point shot that he wants.
And then the Lakers won game 6 by exactly 40 points, which I don't know if LeBron, that was probably in the back of his mind. It was like, he said 40, let's win this game by 40, maybe. I don't know. That was actually the largest series clinching win by a LeBron James team in his career, was 40 points. Also, I have another stat. This is from ESPN, which I found kind of crazy, was that Anthony Davis in game 6, because he hasn't gone injured yet, Hillbilly, it's been incredible, is the first Lakers player with 10 points, 10 rebounds, and 3 blocks in a playoff half, which was the first half, since Pau Gasol back in 2012, Game 7 against the Nuggets. That was also the last time that the Lakers clinched a series on their home court. Until now, because they won Game 6 and they won the series at home.
Too many facts.
Grizzlies. So now the Lakers and the Warriors get to match up, which is the matchup that a lot of people have been looking for. The NBA, oh my gosh, the league is loving that. They're like, Warriors, Lakers, LeBron, Steph, please. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Let's just go through the rest of these matchups, though, that were in the first round. Start with the Celtics and the Hawks, so Billy, because the Hawks, I mean, kind of unexpected how much of a handful they gave the Celtics. It was a 4-2 series. When you watched game 1, it looked like Boston was it looked like a sweep. I mean, they were dominating. They led by as much as 32, but they only won by 13. They took their foot off the pedal, and there was, in the fourth quarter, there was a chance it looked like if Atlanta actually tries and makes a run, they could make this a close game, and it did not look like a close game at all. They won that game, though, but Boston's wins in games 4 and game 6 only came by 8 points each.
True that.
So, I mean, does that give you any pause for concern for Boston at all?
It does, but we see this from Boston. We've seen it for years. I remember Boston lost 2 games in a row to Orlando in Boston this regular season. They have these lapses, and it bears remembering that they are a very young team. And they're just an incredibly experienced, very young team. I mean, the amount of playoff experience that they've had at their young age is just really kind of phenomenal. But they're still prone to those kinds of lapses in judgment. And, their point guard, Marcus Smart, he brings a lot of great things to that team, a lot of energy, a lot of good defense, but he also brings some very questionable decision making. And he can be really on and off. I don't know. I think we're all kind of waiting for Jason Tatum to just truly assume dominance over the team and just really, really lead it. So that things like what we saw, they should have just crushed the Hawks 4 straight. That should not have been close. I am, though, not really worried about the Celtics. I mean, I think that it's a matter of focus. And when they go up against the Sixers, I think they're going to have all the focus that they need, and it won't be a problem.
Yep, we'll talk about that in just a second. You just mentioned the Sixers, though. The other first round Eastern Conference Series, that was a sweep. Sixers just swept the Nets. And not really, I don't think really much to talk about, but obviously Joel Embiid sprayed his LCL in Game 3. That's going to have an effect on the Boston series. Game 3, although, is what we're going to remember as the groin game.
What?
I don't know about you, Hillbilly, but there was, I don't know if there was a magnet or something that just led 76ers players to do that. James Harden, Joel Embiid, but,
Yeah, I guess he's picking it up from James Harden. I don't know, but well, I don't know if that's fair. I mean, James Harden, I thought it was pretty clear that he was going for it. But I could see how I think reasonable minds could differ on that, I guess. That's what it looked like to me.
It was interesting because Embiid had the kick. He was laying on the ground and he kicked. And they called it a flagrant 1, so he wasn't ejected. And then Harden in the second half, I believe, hits him with the hand, and then he gets ejected. And some people were like, well, maybe that's just retribution because they should have ejected Embiid. So they.
Well, and the thing is with Embiid, I mean, so Embiid obviously was trying to kick him in the groin. I think it's one of the most obvious ones I think you've ever seen.
Watch the video, yeah.
But he misses.
Whoops!
Because that's just kind of crazy. And then I guess you argue that Harden didn't mean to, but did hit. I felt like Harden probably meant to, but Embiid definitely meant to. And I don't understand that whole stepping over somebody is so bad that you would kick them in the groin. I don't know. And because I really like Embiid, he seems like a good enough dude. And it's just strange that he would get that upset about that.
Heat of the moment. I don't know. Let's go to the other two West series, though, real quickly. Nuggets, Timberwolves start off. That series wasn't really close. The Nuggets were nice because they didn't sweep them. They gave them the gentleman's sweep. They won 3 games. They gave the Timberwolves the 4th game, and then they said, "You're all right. You're done."
Yeah, they kind of took care of it in pretty business-like fashion. It's just, this is what we're going to do. And, I don't think the Timberwolves played to their talent level. If they did, I think it would have been a competitive series, but that team is just not that. The way that team is currently constituted is just not a good basketball team, despite having some really good singular players there. But yeah, the Nuggets just kind of took care of what they needed to do.
Yeah. And then the last series, Hillbilly did have this one correctly. Suns, they kind of rolled past the Clippers 4-1. It would have been a much better series, I think we both agree, if Kawhi Leonard was not injured, because he looked really. Yes. But when I made that pick, the Clippers, I didn't know Kawhi Leonard was going to get injured.
Fair enough. Yep.
But he looked really good when he played. And that team, I thought, looked really good. And then he got injured, and the Suns just took over. They won Game 1. The Suns, they only won, their largest win in the series out of the 4 games was 14 points. They won 2 games by 5 points and 6 points each. These were close games. Russell Westbrook, Powell, they were actually keeping them in the games.
Yep.
They just, when you go up against Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, that team, without your 2 star players, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. It was just, Russell Westbrook had that end of Game 1, Russell Westbrook's last, couple minutes of that game was some of the most fun I've had watching basketball in a while. Westbrook just looked incredible at the end of that game. He had missed 16 3-pointers that game. But at the end, he just, the block that he had on Devin Booker, he just owned Devin Booker at the end of that game. Looked great. And then, like you said, with Kawhi being injured, already losing Paul George, it wasn't a real test for the Suns.
Yeah, and at this point, you're like, if you're Steve Ballmer and the Clippers, what do you do? This has not worked out because at least one of them is always injured.
Yeah, well, I think Ballmer's probably looking long-term. The team's in LA. They're about to get a new stadium. Mm-hmm. What he needs to do is to develop a reputation as an organization of being a place that people want to play. Because he's in LA. They will come. He's just got to, show people that, we treat stars really well here. And once Kawhi goes, they'll bring in the next star. So I don't think he has much of a choice but to play it out next year with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard coming back. I mean, if they ever did manage to get healthy at that time of the year, I mean, Kawhi looked fantastic. He did not look like a burned out shell of himself.
Oh, yeah.
That was full vintage Kawhi Leonard, as good as any other player in the NBA. It's reasonable to think, I mean, this is just, he has a meniscus tear, right? So, there's every reason to think that he can come back. And I think it just somehow get Paul George and him healthy together with a decent, rotating or a supporting cast, which they need to work on a little bit. Like they need to get a good point guard. Every reason to think they can't be back next year.
Yeah, I mean, if that happens, if it works out next year, I mean, that's great. We'll see. But the Suns roll on. So that's first round recaps. Now let's get to the stuff that's coming up, stuff we're about to watch. Conference Semifinals preview. I don't know if you know this, Hillbilly, but this is the first year ever in the NBA playoffs that all 8 seeds are represented in the second round. You've got a 1 seed, a 2 seed, a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So, I mean, the Nuggets 1, Celtics 2, Sixers 3, Suns 4, Knicks 5, Warriors 6, Lakers 7, Heat 8.
Very nice.
This is a fact.
Sater's facts.
It is a crazy year.
Yeah, it is. And I think we thought this might happen, even though we both had the 2 1 seeds going to the finals. We were kind of like, there's really no dominant team this year. So, this could happen. Let's start in the West with those 2 series previewing, and let's take a look at the Nuggets and the Suns. We're recording this Monday night, by the way, so we haven't watched Game 2 of Nuggets Suns, which is later Monday night. But they did play in Game 1. The Nuggets looked pretty dominant in that game. I mean, the Suns, 27 points from Durant, 29 from Booker. But when Jamal Murray can go for 34, and then Jokic, of course, the 2-time reigning MVP, had 24, and you can get Aaron Gordon with 23, and Michael Porter Jr. can really help you out. It's just, I think this is going to be a closer series. I think the Suns are going to win some games, especially at home, but the Nuggets looked like a championship caliber team on Saturday night.
Yeah, they did, and they looked like they were ready to expose some of the problems that the Suns have. There's a lot of opinion out there, I guess, that the Suns are a bad matchup for the Nuggets. Part of it because of the way the Suns beat the Nuggets pretty bad 2 years ago in the playoffs, and I think a lot of that comes from that series. But I think there's concern on how the Nuggets are going to be able to handle the ball screens that Suns do. Like Jokic can be a tough matchup for the Nuggets. Jokic can be a tough matchup to find somebody, or if he finds himself on the wrong perimeter player for the other team. But I don't know. Looking into this matchup, and I think we talked about this, I thought the Nuggets look like they should be about as well suited for the Suns as you can be. I mean, they've got great individual defenders for the 2 big problems that the Suns present, in Durant and in Booker. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is a good matchup for Booker, and Aaron Gordon is about as good as you're going to get for Kevin Durant. Nobody's going to shut him down, but he's at least going to make Kevin Durant work for it. And on the other side of it, Kevin Durant and Devin Booker don't get to take plays off or possessions off. Like they have to play hard defense on the other end because that starting lineup for the Nuggets doesn't have a player that you can leave alone. Every single player there can score. I mean, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is not necessarily known for being a bucket getter and like going to get his own shot, but he's also about as good a catch and shoot 3-point shooter you have in the entire league. At one point, he was leading the league in 3-point percentage.
Dash facts.
Michael Porter Jr. is the same. Same thing with Aaron Gordon. I mean, he's great coming off of down screens and getting to the basket for the dunk. He is great, or he's a good enough 3-point shooter that they have to respect him out there. So Kevin Durant and Booker have to work every single minute out there. Whereas Jamal Murray, who is having an incredible playoff so far and looks like he is completely back and he's going to drop a 50-point game at some point. I mean, it just seems almost inevitable that that's going to happen, especially if Chris Paul is guarding him. But Jamal Murray gets to cover Chris Paul, and you don't have to worry about Chris Paul that much anymore. And that just leaves all that extra energy for Jamal Murray. And the Nuggets have a lot of kind of built-in advantages that I think are going to carry them through it. I mean, obviously, Kevin Durant and Devin Booker are going to at least win you a couple of games. But I think that they do have some systemic problems that unless the Nuggets really screw it up, and I think Jokic is too much of a steadying presence for that to really happen, I think it's the Nuggets to lose.
I think I'd go with Denver in 6. I think Phoenix could take 2 games. Maybe only 1. Especially if Denver can win a game in Phoenix, either game 3 or 4, that might be it. But I'll go with Nuggets in 6. How many games you thinking, Hillbilly?
I don't know. It's Kevin Durant and Devin Booker on the other side. I think it may go to 7. And one of the reasons that I say that is because the Nuggets are not a good away team. As good as they are at home, they're just a below average road team.
Well, I know, but so are the Warriors.
No, I know, but as much as I like Nikola Jokic, I don't know that he's quite, Curry. I would love to be wrong. I love the Nuggets. Now that the Bucks are out, the Nuggets are the team that I'm personally rooting for.
Oh, so. Okay. All right. Well, that other series in the West is, I think, that if we said 5 years ago, oh my gosh, everybody's so excited for Warriors versus LeBron, everybody would have been like, again? Because we had this in the finals 4 straight years. But now it's could we get this one final time, please? Because this may be the final time we see LeBron against Steph and the Warriors in the playoffs. This is what's going to happen. 6 versus 7 in the West, and the NBA is loving that. I mean, honestly, we joke about the league being rigged, and there was that player who came out and said, "Yeah, it's rigged. There's a script. There's an entire script. The league is rigged." Which, I mean, really, the Lakers would have been so bad for those years, and the Knicks would have been terrible for all these years. The NBA would have scripted that.
And at least one disgruntled NBA former player wouldn't have told. I mean, somebody wouldn't have backed him up, and said that that's actually happening. It's difficult to keep a conspiracy that broad in its nature a total secret.
Give me a break. But if the league was scripting, they would have picked Lakers and Warriors. Maybe not in the second round, but they would have picked them. So we're gonna see that in the second round, and maybe the final time we see, because we forget, as I said, Steph Curry is 35 years old. He doesn't play like it, and LeBron doesn't play like he's almost 40. But they do. They're still absolutely insane. I don't know, Hillbilly. What do you think? Because these are 2 teams who started off the year really poorly, not even in play-in territory poorly. And the Lakers made some trades. They brought it back into the play-in. They finished the regular season. They won the last 8 games or so. And the Warriors, they were injured, and they finally came back, and they look like they did last year when they won the NBA title. So I'm really excited about this series. I don't know. What do you think is going to happen?
You talked about how old the 2 players are and how they're not playing like their respective ages. But I will say that, there are 2 great players in this game or in this series, as you talked about it. LeBron and Steph Curry, 2 all-time greats. I mean, and one of them is in their prime, and the other one isn't. And I don't think LeBron's in his prime anymore. At least he hasn't shown it. Maybe he's been holding it in reserve because he knew that Memphis didn't really have it. But he has not looked like he's just as good as he's ever been. I think Steph Curry is actually as good as he's ever been. And I just, at the end of the day, I think I'm going to go with that. Whichever one of the absolute superstars is in their prime. I mean, Anthony Davis is probably going to be the best player for the Lakers in that series. So I think Curry will carry them over. I think Curry's got a better supporting cast in the Warriors than LeBron has with the Lakers. I mean, they did revamp it. They have been better. I've been dismissive, I guess, because they did have such an easy record at the end of the year. And Memphis did just also kind of fall apart on them. But then again, the Lakers took care of business. I mean, they did what they were supposed to do. You can only beat the teams that are in front of you, and they've done that. And by the end of it, Memphis was absolutely beaten. I mean, they just looked awful. They knew they were beaten. But I still think that when you look at the way that the Warriors are constructed, I mean, Anthony Davis, like I said, has to be a very important player for the Lakers. Well, the Warriors have somebody really, really good in Kevon Looney to make Anthony Davis's job hard. And that's all you really got to do. He's gonna be the best or one of the best players out there on the court, no matter what you do. But you make that job hard for him, and it's just what it makes it less likely that Anthony Davis is going to get through that series. And Klay Thompson is due. I think it'd be Klay Thompson's had some great games this year. It's almost predictable that he's going to have at least a few, great games in this Lakers series. At the end of the day, though, like I said, I think Steph Curry is playing as well as he ever has. He is an all-time great. I'm just going to go with that.
Yeah, I'll go. Well, I had this series in my playoff preview, so I'm going to stick with it, and I'm going to go with the Warriors. One thing, though, that is... I said Steph Curry had 236 points in that last series. Jordan Poole, who was huge for them last year, and obviously, remember back in, it was October, when all that stuff came out about him and Draymond, and then this thing, well, it was just on the bench. They don't acknowledge each other, and that clip kind of went all over social media. But he only had 8 points in Game 7. He wasn't really a factor. Only had 76 points in the series.
True.
Klay obviously didn't play as well either, but they didn't give as many minutes to Jordan Poole. So I don't know. What do you think about all that? Do they really need him for the Lakers series?
Well, I think that Jordan Poole, it's very possible that he could have a better series too. I don't know that the Lakers really have the perimeter defense to give him the same kinds of problems. And so it wouldn't be surprising if he had a better game too, or a better series, I'm sorry, or a more involved one. Andrew Wiggins has looked really good. He looks very rested, which he is. He had that long absence for personal reasons, and he looks like he's got all the energy in the world out there, and he's playing very good. And, going back to last year when the Warriors won the championship, Steph Curry is obviously the most important player, but after him, it was Andrew Wiggins who was the most important. It wasn't Klay Thompson or Draymond Green. And Kevon Looney was also really critical to them winning the championship last year. You have those guys playing extremely well. Draymond Green is playing well. And I just think Klay Thompson will probably get his shot back. I think that's too much.
Me too. I think the Warriors are going to beat the Lakers in that series. All right, so let's go to the East and the Heat and the Knicks. Game 1 of that series was Sunday. Sunday was also... The Heat and the Knicks have obviously played each other before, as I mentioned. They have history. That 99 series, obviously. And this is the 25th anniversary of a infamous picture that's gone around in NBA circles. I have Jeff Van Gundy. The Heat and the Knicks are fighting in the first round. Jeff Van Gundy on the floor, hugging Alonzo Mourning.
I was watching that game while it happened. And it was just absolutely, because Jeff Van Gundy is not a big man.
No.
And it looked like he was like an elf in a forest. I mean, it was crazy. But those teams, they were so physical back then. I mean, those are back in the days, like, where you had Charles Oakley and Anthony Mason, on the Knicks, and, Alonzo Mourning and PJ Armstrong on the Heat, and just playing brutal basketball against one another. It's really exciting because those were great matchups. And the teams that, we're going to see play against each other in this next series, they are kind of reminiscent of that. I mean, especially by modern NBA standards, those are grit and grind, tough, blue collar kind of teams. And it's going to be kind of cool to see that.
Yeah. I mean, the Heat, they kind of didn't play that way to beat the Bucks. The difference in 3-point shot, because the Heat, I mean, I don't know. Obviously, most people doubted them going to that Bucks series, but I think with them and the Warriors and the Lakers, and these guys, and they've been these places before. The Heat last year were one shot away from the finals. It's like almost sometimes you kind of have to disregard what they do in the regular season, especially for players like Jimmy Butler, because when players like him get the chance, I mean, they're going to clinch that chance and go crazy. And what also helped the Heat is all these guys that almost come out of nowhere and help them. Guys like Gabe Vincent, Caleb Martin, who were just knocking down threes, and you're like, who? I've never heard of this guy before. How is he destroying Milwaukee?
And then the ones that you have heard of, Kevin Love. Like, we all know who he is. Cleveland just bought him out. Like, they just said, I think he probably asked to be bought out, but
because he wasn't
Cleveland
playing.
let him go for nothing.
Yeah.
They got absolutely nothing for it, and now he's producing for Miami. It's because Miami has the best coach in the league. I mean, Spoelstra is just it's sad that he's never won Coach of the Year.
That's a fact.
Because
really?
If you were starting a team right now, Spoelstra's got to be your number one pick for coach. I mean, at least he would be for me.
Yeah, I mean, well, you take a look at his resume. He coached the big three teams to 4 straight finals.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, he stayed the coach, and they've gone to another finals. They've been a shot away with this group. I mean, it's absolutely insane. I did not know he's never won Coach of the Year. That's crazy.
It's because they don't. Sometimes they do have great regular seasons, but they are always trying to win in the championship. And it's really like you think about them compared to the Wizards, because they a lot of times will be drafting in similar areas. Like the Wizards, they're always in that middle. They never get super high draft picks because they do a little bit too well for that, and they just constantly suck. But the Heat are oftentimes in that same neighborhood, but they just find these guys and coach them up, like your Caleb Martins, like your Gabriel Vincents, because it's not just Spoelstra, obviously. It's the whole coaching, the whole management system.
Well, Pat Riley's there. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
And, they are always competitive, and they keep bringing these guys in.
I mean, let's just move on to the series, the Heat and the Knicks. Game 1 was Sunday. The Heat overcame another deficit, 12 points. It looked like in the first half, New York, with that crowd, when that MSG crowd is going, it's one of the best in the league to support your team. It wasn't looking good for Miami. And again, in the second half, they come back and they beat the Knicks. Now, the Knicks were without Julius Randle, who's obviously going to play a key part in this series for New York. And then Jimmy Butler rolled his ankle. And I don't know if you saw him, Billy, but because he kept playing after that. There was like 6 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. He's just standing in the corner practicing his catch and shoot motion because that's all he could do.
Yeah. They just left him out there as a decoy. Yeah. Well, that's the great unknown for this series. I mean, I don't know how you can have watched what Miami's done so far in the playoffs and not think that they're the favorite to win this series if Jimmy Butler's healthy. But that ankle it looked like he was pretty hobbled. So we'll see how that is. But we'll also see if Randall can come back. I'm hoping it'll be a competitive series because those really were some really awesome series in the 90s. And it's just kind of good to see that back. And it's good for the NBA for, New York, Miami, LA, Golden State. It's good for the league.
It feels like the league has a lot of momentum right now because of the ratings that I said for Game 4 were the best in, 20 years? People are watching Steph. People are going to watch that LeBron-Steph series. The Heat and the Knicks is obviously going to draw back the people who love nostalgia. So yeah, it is kind of difficult to pick a winner because we don't know the status of Jimmy Butler, but if you had to, Hillbilly, who would you choose to win?
The Heat, because I think Butler doesn't have to be 100%. I don't even think he needs to be 70% to get out there and play very, very well.
That's a lot of numbers.
And I'm just going to they have more experience. I mean, New York, they've got a lot of players on that team that don't really have any playoff experience. Jalen Brunson obviously does. He was in the conference championship last year. But, a lot of their players are still kind of coming up, and Butler's ready. So hopefully mentally and his game is ready. Hopefully his ankle is ready, and I'll pick the Heat.
I'm not going to go against my Miami Heat either. I'm going to pick them. But especially, just winning that game in New York, Game 1, I think, is massive. Because that's a game you take away from the Knicks at home and their fans. So, I mean, there you go. But the thing I noticed with this series is Game 2 is on Tuesday. So a lot of people were saying, and Game 2 has happened by the time this podcast has come out, but a lot of people just said, just send him back to Miami, Jimmy Butler. Game 3 isn't until Saturday. I don't know why it's so long, but that's a huge gap, and that is massively beneficial for Jimmy Butler. Game 3 not being until Saturday. You don't have to win Game 2, so just go back and try and be as best as you can by Game 3.
Yeah, that gap to Saturday, that is ridiculous.
Why?
I mean, it's almost too much, but it's good for them. No, I would seriously consider that. I mean, they probably went into New York with the mindset that we want to win one, It'd be great if they won two. I mean, if I was Spoelstra, he's going to do something better than I would do.
Duh.
But what I would do is not play Butler. Let him just send him. He would already be back in Miami resting, already. And go out there and just shoot 1,000,000 3-point shots. And just hope that you have a really good night and you win another one, Because without Butler and without Hero, it's difficult to imagine Miami being competitive. I just don't know how they field a competitive offense. But unless they just get crazy lucky from behind the 3-point line.
Well, yeah, you need Kevin Love, Duncan Robinson, Gabe Vincent, Caleb Barton, Bam Adebayo. You need those guys to play excellent if you want a chance to win.
Yeah, and so that's probably not going to happen. So why not just put Jimmy Butler back, let him just relax, because they're in the driver's seat. If they put Butler out there in Game 2 and he tweaks the ankle, and now all of a sudden he may not come back to the series at all, you went from being in the driver's seat to having almost no chance.
So that's the Heat and the Knicks. And then we go to the 2v3 in the East, the final conference semifinal matchup, which is the 76ers and the Celtics. And we talked about the Celtics and how, they should have put away Atlanta. They didn't. So the 76ers get a little bit more rest. But the issue with the 76ers is that Joel Embiid did not play in Game 1, and I think if they want to have any shot at winning the series, they need Joel Embiid to play well, I would say.
Yeah, he's going to win the MVP. He deserves it.
It's true.
I think it's really, really close, but I mean, I think he deserves it as much as anyone else. And part of the reason he deserves it is because how dependent upon him they are. I mean, they really need him both offensively and defensively. It's just a completely different team without him. I am very skeptical that James Harden can lead a team right now, can lead a team to beat a team as good as the Celtics. He would have to be in absolute full peak form, and he's just not there anymore. Tyrese Maxey's just way too erratic of a player. And the Celtics just have an answer for everything. We talked about this in the playoff preview. We talked about being a two-way team, and how important that was. And how, it's typical that the championship team is going to be top 10 in both. That's because that's just kind of what happens. And the Celtics were the only one that fit that mold this year. And they fit it big time, 2 and 4, I think, in offensive and defensive rating. To lose a player the magnitude of Joel Embiid and then have to go up against a team that is that good, both offensively and defensively, I wouldn't be surprised if it was a sweep.
I don't think so.
Whoa. I don't know about a sweep, but okay. I mean, especially if Joel Embiid is healthy, I think they can take a game or two, but if...
Oh, yeah. No. If Embiid's healthy, I think that's totally different.
Yeah.
But
we don't know. We don't know. So, yeah.
Well, we know that he's not healthy. I mean, even when he comes back, he's not going to be himself. Now, if I'm wrong and he comes back Game 2 and he's just vintage Joel Embiid, I think that's totally different. Because I think he is so good that he can make up for some of the other deficits on that team. But I don't think that'll happen.
No. I'm going to go with my pick in the playoff preview, too. I'm going to go with Boston. So there you go. Our conference semifinal, a little bit of preview here on the Zander's Facts podcast with Hillbilly. So to close out this podcast, we all know that Hillbilly's championship pick, it went sideways.
Sure.
So you get a second chance, Hillbilly. Who would you say is who's your new pick to win the finals?
The Celtics.
Debatable.
Ooh.
Oh, I mean, I thought, it was really razor thin close before. I think that it would probably bear out if you listen to the playoff preview again, that it was really, really close between the Bucks and Celtics. And everything is just coming up Celtics. I mean, the Bucks are not just hobbled, they're gone.
Fact nugget.
The Sixers are hobbled, like we talked about. It just seems really unlikely that Joel Embiid is going to come back fully. And that's just playing right into the Celtics' hands there. They're going to have home court advantage in the finals. And it just seems like everything's coming up for them. The level of defense that they can ratchet it up to. I mean, when you're talking about like the last 5 minutes in a playoff game, and you have Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, just putting all that perimeter pressure on there, as good as it gets, backed up with like Robert Williams and Al Horford behind. They don't have any problems on defense at all. And they're very 3-point heavy, which is part of the problem that they can have, is that if they go a little bit, if their 3-point shot goes south, they shoot so many of them that it can be a real problem for them. But on average, that's just going to win out because they are so good from the 3-point line and they score so well.
Well, an 8 seed has made the finals before, Hillbilly. It was that 99 Knicks. So I wouldn't be so sure. But no, I think I'd take the Celtics too, out of the East.
I mean, I would be rooting for the Nuggets in that finals,
Okay,
but I think the Celtics would beat them.
All right, so there you go. Thanks again to Hillbilly for coming on the podcast, for giving our recap of the first round, which, I mean, I loved watching all those games, and I think the second round, the conference semifinals, is going to turn out great too. If you haven't been watching playoff basketball, now is the time to start, because it's some good stuff. All right, Hillbilly, thanks again for coming on the podcast, for expressing your feelings. I know it's a very difficult time right now for you, but thank you.
No, thanks for having me on.
Zander's Facts.
Oh, yeah. Thanks once again to Hillbilly for coming back on the podcast to redeem himself, really, but also to update us on the NBA playoffs. If you haven't been watching basketball in May and into June, you need to be doing so this year. The basketball has been awesome. But that is it. That is all the facts I have for episode 103 of the podcast, y'all. Thank you so much for listening all the way through. And remember that if you liked all the facts that we had on this week's podcast, remember to follow this podcast, download this episode 103, rate and review the podcast. Then check us out on all the socials, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, at Zander's Facts. That is Zander with a Z. And most importantly, remember to tell all your friends. Spread the facts. Zander's Facts Podcast. Tell all your friends about the podcast, about the newsletter, Zander's Weekend Facts, Zander's Facts on YouTube. Go check out our YouTube channel because all our new episodes get posted on YouTube with a nice background. Subscribe, you can watch, it's so nice. And then check out the Zander's Facts link tree because it has all the Zander's Facts links that you need. The Zander's Facts link tree, which is linked in this episode's description as well. Check out all the links in the episode's description because they've got so many facts it's going to blow your mind. It's going to make your head spin. We're winning. You're never going to get tired of winning because we're winning with lots of facts. There you go. That is episode 103 of the podcast. Episode 104 is coming up next week. Not definitive yet what we're going to talk about, but I can tell you it is going to be something very factual that you are going to want to listen to. So make sure you remind yourself next Wednesday, May 10th, to listen, to download to episode 104 of the Zander's Facts podcast. But that is it. That is a wrap on episode 103 of the Zander's Facts podcast. Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see y'all with episode 104 next week.
Get off my plane.